being dead is absolutely nothing. The bit of experience that I've had. But at 12, I hitchhiked 600 miles from Montreat to Memphis. I could just imagine the airplane flying apart and me having to bail out, and everybody on the airplane would have been dead. It was my last flight in MB-52. Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis at about the time we were over town.
Hey there, adventure seekers. I'm Kenny, host of the Novel World Travels podcast, where I'll explore the transformative power of experience. Dive deep with me as I chat with extraordinary people, uncovering the lessons hidden in their journeys, the good, the bad, and the life-changing. Live vicariously, embrace new perspectives, and grow along with me on the Novel World Travels podcast. All right, everybody, welcome to the Novel World Travels podcast. Today, I want to welcome you, Larry, to the podcast. He's a multifaceted individual with a wealth of experience and perspectives to share. Larry has an impressive background spanning an education in physics, philosophy, and over 35 years of pioneering work in energy research and sustainability. He's authored over 200 publications and reports and holds 4 patents related to energy-efficient technologies. But beyond his professional accomplishment, Larry is an avid traveler who has had many transformative experiences that have shaped his worldview. I'm excited to dive into Larry's journey and hear his insights on how exploring new places and having novel experiences can foster personal growth. Thanks for chatting with me, Larry.
Well, I'm flattered. That's a very interesting introduction. I've never had one quite like it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you could have it here.
Well, I'm flattered that you're here in my house and enjoying, dog, wife, me.
Yeah. I want to mention to
the external world.
Wanted to mention to the listeners that I'm up in beautiful Boulder, the mountains of beautiful Boulder, Colorado. I can look out the window to my right and see all of the plains from here, and it's beautiful. It's stunning. So hopefully I'll get to give you all a glimpse at some point. But during the podcast, it's just going to be me and you. So let's get started.
Okay,
Ready?
sure.
All right, so can you tell us about your upbringing and early experiences with travel and new things? How did that shape your perspective and curiosity of the world growing up?
That's a big and interesting question. I remember I'm the son of a Presbyterian minister who had a PhD in philosophy, and his parents were not well educated, and his father was a drunkard. And so that was sort of the heavy-duty thing that was part of my life. I, of course, didn't really grasp what it meant to be. My father had a tough time in the beginning of his life. He, at age 10, took care of a doctor's horse in Huntington, West Virginia. To say that was something back in the days in which you needed to have a horse and a wagon in order to get from point A to point B across Huntington, West Virginia, in order to take care of somebody who needs the medical attention. He fed the doc's horse, and after a while he got a job as a secretary to a firm that did construction. And he skipped a grade and graduated as valedictorian of his high school class at Huntington, West Virginia. So a few years later, when he got a PhD from the University of Virginia in philosophy, his mother gave him a big hug and told him how pleased that she was, but she was much more impressed when he was valedictorian of the class and kept the family alive because he had daughters and one uncle who was sufficiently well-to-do that he said, "Well, Larry, I'm a junior, but Larry Senior, if you want to go to college and you can send yourself through, get scholarships and whatever, and work summers, then I'll take care of the family while you're gone." So that's the way that worked out. So that was both a beautiful thing and, of course, heavy-duty stuff for a kid who was kind of wild and woolly and didn't know about the Jesus that my father talked about sometimes. And I was impressed with the way he did sermons and talked to people and treated students at the college that he went to, which is Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, where I ended up graduating way back when, 1962.
Now, where exactly were you raised in West Virginia?
No, I wasn't. I was born in Richmond and was there.
Virginia.
Palmyra, Richmond, Virginia. Palmyra Street, and then we moved when I was age 2.5 to Memphis, Tennessee, where it was 1726 Tutwiler. The telephone number was 72941. I don't know why I remember stuff like that, but so we lived there. And my early journey was, I guess that was the first serious one. In the summertime, we would go to a place called Montreat, North Carolina, which was a sort of quasi-church camp thing, not far from Asheville and Mount Mitchell. And so all of us kids ran around with no shoes and shorts and dirty T-shirts and loved it.
So that was that the big travel as a child going there?
Yeah, the summer we would go and visit family. My mother's family was from the middle of Virginia, and so she grew up on a farm and had 5 or 6 sisters and brothers and all that. And as she once told me, we didn't know we were poor. But they were, as well as my father and his family and all that. And I never knew that I was poor, but I was, but we made it along.
Sure.
And
sure.
So in Montreat, I fell in love with the place and had a lot of friends, and there were a lot of activities for kids and not too much church stuff, which suited me fine. And my first serious trip on my own, we would hitchhike around Montreat, Black Mountain, Asheville, and all that as young kids. Again, no shoes.
How old were you when you were hitchhiking? I mean, hitchhiking nowadays we see as something that's
right.
You shouldn't do, but
Yeah.
that was quite common at the time.
In Montreat, it was common if you happened to be 5 years old. And
you were hitchhiking as a 5-year-old.
Yeah. I mean, we're just within the boundaries of this sort of church camp.
Oh, okay,
And,
gotcha.
So, but at 12, I hitchhiked 600 miles from Montreat to Memphis, and
Alone?
Alone, yeah. And so my parents worried about me. It turns out I managed to. Somebody picked me up that allowed me to crash on their couch overnight, and so it took me like 2.5 days to do this. And my parents were upset that I only called them once, and collect, of course. And it was not when you could sort of pick up a telephone. So my parents, it turns out, were worried about me, and but I made it home okay, and that was fun. And so it launched my willingness to do other longer-term hitchhiking, and so I've done a lot of that. And I guess my freshman year at Davidson College, I went to a place called Davidson College in North Carolina, and 20 miles north of Charlotte, at age 17. So I would bum rides with people who had cars and stuff, but and learned how to fly a J3 Piper Cub, which was kind of fun.
I want to hear about that, but before we go too far, what prompted that initial 12-year-old 600-mile hitchhike?
I didn't want to waste money on a bus ticket. My parents had, of course, given me enough money to do it, but I thought I'd save it for other things. So,
were they aware of you hitchhiking?
Yeah, they were, and
but they were worried, but they didn't forbid it.
They didn't forbid it, but were worried.
Okay.
And I didn't really sort of understand the worry much until I got home, and they were pretty point blank about the fact that I should touch base more often when I'm on the road.
Well, apparently they love you.
Yeah, they love me, and I'm very fortunate they did. I have one other sister who's 10 and a half years older than me, and I didn't know her terribly well. I mean, I was 5 years old when she went to college, and but I did. She ended up marrying an interesting guy and moving to Southern California, and so I hitchhiked out there 2 or 3 times, and learned how to jump a freight. And I remember doing that in Denver.
So you're living the hobo life.
A little bit, yeah. But that was to work in the summertime after, let's see, when I turned 18, I guess I was halfway through my freshman year at Davidson. I got my private pilot's license, and so that made it such that I could fly my own airplane here and there. That was back in the days when it cost $7 an hour to rent a Piper Cub. If you have an instructor, it's $9, and Tri-Pacer is $14 an hour. And you could rent a Cessna for $15, $16 an hour.
Wow.
So in the summer after my freshman year, I hitchhiked out to Washington State and to work in a pea harvest, Green Giant Company. That's 20 miles north of Walla Walla in a little town called Waitsburg, Washington. And I did jump freights and bum a ride with whoever I could, and spent one night on the inside of a gigantous culvert-like thing that was on a freight car to Little America. And I always wore a wash and wear suit with a tie, and carried a little suitcase, but it made me look sort of harmless. I weighed 116 pounds. And so, you had another little kid, but, he's got a suit on and stuff, and maybe he's not going to swipe my purse or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot hitchhiking, and then when I got to Waitsburg, went to work in the pea harvest, and was delighted that I made $1.41 an hour, and time and a half for everything over 56 hours a week. We routinely worked 84-hour weeks, 12 hours a night.
Wow.
During the pea harvest, and some other friends from Davidson were also there, and that was kind of exciting. And I remember a couple of times I'd work from 7 at night until 7 the next morning, and then typically we'd go and take a shower and get some rest. But twice I recall bumming a ride in a car with one of 3 or the other guys that would go with me, and renting a Cessna 172 at the Walla Walla Airport, and flying around for an hour or so to take a look at the mountains and whatever else.
Wow.
Then we'd all have put $4 in the pot to pay for the airplane ride. And then we'd go out to a local tavern and drink beer all day and shoot the shit. Go back and put in another 12-hour shift.
Wow.
And then finally get some well-needed sleep.
For sure. Those were the young days then, huh?
Yeah, back when I had energy.
All the energy and vigor.
Energy, vigor, and willingness to do dumb damn things.
The theme I'm picking up when you were younger is you were no stranger to non-traditional travel. I mean, you were hitchhiking. You were you eventually got a pilot's license. You were hoboing it up on the trains and moving around. And with nowadays, I think a lot of that would cause for a lot of concern and maybe anxiety for many people. But at those times, how did you feel? I mean, jumping on a moving train or throwing your thumb up and getting in the nearest car.
When people stop and you thank them very much. And say, "Hi, I'm Larry."
It's a different time.
Yeah. I remember one time I got a Volkswagen for my graduation gift from my father and mother, and and of course drove immediately. I skipped graduation, which much to their chagrin, and drove with friends to Waitsburg, Washington, to once again work in the pea harvest. Then on the way back, I recall picking up a black guy on the highway 66, Route 66. I went from Walla Walla, Washington, and went down south to the Los Angeles area to visit my sister and her husband at Pomona College, and then I was driving the Volkswagen back toward Memphis, and it's a nice long ride, and so 60 or 80 miles outside of L.A., the black guy was hitchhiking, and so I picked him up, and he was very deferential. He's not used to white people picking him up and stuff, and said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and here's my driver's license." And so one thing led to another. We chatted for a while, and I decided to let him drive. And so I just crawled and went to sleep in the back seat for a few hours. And,
can you remind me when was this?
I was in 1962.
So he probably was a bit startled by you picking him up.
Yeah,
that was a different time.
He's a very sweet guy. He knew how to drive a Volkswagen, and he was headed to Chicago, and I was headed to Memphis. So Oklahoma City, we parted company. So I got some sleep, which enabled me to get more miles done, and dropped him in Oklahoma City, and he headed north, and I headed east.
Wow. So in these travels, you've met so many people that you've met once, had probably a conversation with, and never saw them again. Did any of those interactions strike you? Do you remember any one in particular that you just don't forget to this day?
Yeah, I can think of a couple. In part because you asked me if I
sure share one. Sure.
Okay, I was headed again from Southern California via Thumb to Washington State to work in the pea harvest, and a couple picked me up 30, 40 miles south of Reno. Turns out that he was a slot machine repairman at one of the casinos, and they were obviously not, rich or anything of the sort. Yeah, it's kind of getting to be evening time, and they invited me to sleep on their couch and stay over for dinner. And what I recall is, how much in love they were, and very sweet to one another. And the other thing is that we drank iced tea from quart jars, a quart jar without a top on it. That's what they had.
Sure.
Opened some beans for dinner. In other words, they weren't wealthy folks, but they understood. Here's this harmless-looking kid out in the street.
And they gave you the hospitality that they could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet folk. And, of course, I always ask them questions like, can you make a slot machine such that it does pretty well? And can you make them looser or tighter and all that? Yeah. Probably 10 or 15 years ago. Let's see, I've been in Boulder. Wincy and I moved from Syracuse, New York. Wincy is my beloved wife. Her field is law, but she's abandoned that and does art these days. And in any event, I hustled up some work with an Indian organization, feather Indian, not turban. And they had discovered me from when I used to work for eSource, a company that does energy efficiency work. And so they hired me to do some energy audits on tribal land. And so we ended up doing, I think, 5 or 6 maybe energy audits in various states, including North Dakota and including where California, Arizona, and Nevada touch one another. It's kind of bad country, but very, very hot. And doing energy audits and teaching people how to do their own energy audits and writing reports. It happens that I glanced through one that I'm sort of cleaning out some old stuff with the view to perhaps selling our house one of these days. But in any event, I found myself reading one of these reports and thought, damn, that's pretty good. You know, and the whole business of casinos and how to make them work and whatnot came back to my mind, and I've invented some interesting ways to figure out how you can save energy and nonetheless allow people to smoke, because the word is if you keep people from smoking in casinos, that's like taking 20% off of the top of your take. From that's casino wisdom.
Interesting.
And so you have to figure out how you can deal with that and do good indoor air quality without wasting a bunch of energy. And so I've figured out how to do that. Well, wherever you have a cigarette, you have a place that secretly, let's imagine you're sitting at a bar, and the side of a bar usually has something to allow you, if something spills on the bar, it doesn't spill in your lap, so there's this little rise. Well, let's imagine that you put a series of holes in that little rise, and you connected that to a plenum, and that's part of the exhaust air system in the casino that always is on, or it's off, or at a very, very low speed. But as soon as it sniffs, well, the essence of a cigarette smoke,
Sure.
then it gently raises the speed. So,
Interesting.
if somebody's got, an ashtray at their slot machine and they're doing what people do, here's all of a sudden, and they put a cigarette over there and air ticks up. And so fundamentally what that does is suck from the source and then to the external world. Turns out that works for toilets as well.
Oh, wow.
Let's imagine that you sit down on a toilet, and so that then turns on a tiny little fan that's part of the toilet seat.
Sure.
The crapper flapper, if you will. Okay. And so that then goes to the external world. And so you can, most evacuation systems in bathroom are immediately above your head. So the essence of what makes the smell is immediately below you, and it sucks it across your nose on the way to the external world. Why not cut it off?
Right at your bum.
At the source.
Yeah, exactly. That makes perfect sense.
So get them at the source.
Yeah, exactly. I think the ones designed for the ceiling are not to save you from the smell, to save the people outside, as opposed to the one in the toilet saves you from having to smell it yourselves.
True enough, but it also plays another key role, which is to get rid of moisture when you take a shower.
Right.
So,
and that's interesting. But with your extensive career and research in sustainability, in what ways has your views preserving the environment influenced your travel destinations, method of travel, or which ways have you traveling throughout your life influenced your views on the environment and sustainability?
Well, it makes me feel guilty when I grab a machine that wastes a ton of energy.
Yeah. What sort of machine? I mean, it's with regard to travel.
The truth is, I used to be in the Air Force.
Okay.
And I started flying airplanes early on, and so I was a pilot. But my eyes aren't good enough to be a pilot, and but they're good enough to be a navigator. I didn't really want to go into the Air Force, but I, at that point, was just graduated from college, and was a bunch of people were taking tests and that sort of thing, and just on a fling, I decided to take an officer test. The recruiters said they really wanted me. I hadn't had anybody to do that well, and this and that, and so. And I thought, how painful could it be?
I mean, it had to be a bit more of an incentive than it not being painful for you to go in. And what was your interest? See the world?
Didn't do as well as I thought I should. I switched majors from physics to philosophy a couple of weeks before I graduated, and managed to, get some half-decent grades. But I didn't feel like I was sufficiently well disciplined to do graduate school at that particular point in my life, and I thought that I should shift gears. And there wasn't a war in Vietnam at that point, and I always liked to fly airplanes anyway, and so I thought, so I sort of half-heartedly went into the Air Force. But, it's like I've always had fun doing whatever I managed to do. And so I went into the Air Force and went through officer training school and then Navigator school. And instead of living on the base with other bachelors, a group of 4 of us rented a place. We call it the 2200 Club, 2200 Washington Avenue. And so we had, 4-bedroom place that we hung out and partied pretty hardy. And my attitude was not very good for sort of military bearing. I took a course in Greek history at the local university and did drink beer and stuff. I'm not flying airplanes all at the same time, but so I remember a guy who was some super lieutenant or something that gave me a bag of shit about my military bearing, and I didn't polish my shoes as adequately as they thought I should, and so I explained to him precisely how I felt about it, and namely that flying airplanes and shining shoes strike me as being importantly different tasks.
I think
with
so.
Different ends.
I think so. What airplanes? You've already told me, but share with the listeners. What airplane did you end up navigating in?
Well, let's see. I guess I graduated at the top of the class in navigation school, so I got to elect whether I went to electronic warfare officer school or bombardier school or go immediately to navigate airplanes, and so I elected to go to electronic warfare officer school because I had fooled around with electronics as a kid, so the electronic warfare thing I assumed would have a choice at the end of the school like we had with navigation, and so I was at the top of my class in that because one of the possibilities was to go to what's called electronic intelligence, in which you'd fly RB-57s. And that would be based in France. And I really wanted to go to France, in part because I was married to a woman whose field was French literature, and she would like to go to France as well.
Sure.
So it turns out that some general somewhere in the Strategic Air Command discovered that the best graduates of the Electronic Warfare Officer School were selecting to go to electronic intelligence instead of the other option, which was bomber defense on a B-52. And, I discovered that they actively wanted to get the best people to go to bomber defense because of this general decision. And so my grades dropped. It turns out that everybody in our whole flight had to go to bomber defense. And So I ended up, after a couple of other schools, flying B-52s, a very interesting airplane, very interesting electronic warfare officer work. B-52s have some very interesting properties. They weigh about 190,000 pounds, which is a big number, but they carry 315,000 pounds of gas. And at that point, gas was JP4, jet propulsion mixture number 4, akin to kerosene. And Uncle Sam paid 11 cents a gallon for that gasoline.
Wow.
Gasoline weighs about 6.24 pounds per gallon.
For any of you listeners who are unfamiliar with the B-52 and maybe didn't live in the era where they were prominent, I mean, they're still around and still used, but the B-52, if you've ever seen any old clips of the massive bombers dropping bombs on Vietnam, those are the B-52s. Their wingspan is enormous. Do you know how long those are? They're big.
100 feet, yeah.
They're big. So that's the airplane he navigated for.
Yeah, I was one of 3 navigators on board.
Okay.
There's a regular navigator who tries to figure out where you are, a radar bombardier who tries to get bombs on target, and an electronic warfare officer who does some celestial navigation, measuring the height of stars here and there, but also tries to sense the radars of something in an airplane that might have an agenda of shooting you down or shooting a missile from ground to the air. And so what one tries to do is a number of different things to deceive and to lessen the likelihood of getting shot out of the sky.
So I have a particular question in mind, but before we get there, to sum it up with regard to your military experience, flying, and I mean, where all were you transferred to, or where were you stationed?
I was stationed from Beale Air Force Base throughout my entire career.
Okay, and where's that?
Beale is north of Sacramento, California, about 50 miles. I used to live, when I first got stationed there, I lived in a little town called Marysville. It's a few miles from the base. But decided to move to Berkeley, California, because, well, for one thing, it was a civilized area of the world, and San Francisco being what it is, and I love the symphony. And Berkeley then and now is the site of one of the best universities in the United States of America, and I was interested in art and pottery, and one thing and another. I picked that up when I was in Sacramento at Electronic Warfare Officer School. But
in general, how did your military service affect your worldview?
Well, that's a fair enough question.
I mean, I don't know too many people who've served, including myself, that maintain the same perspective of the world before joining and leaving.
Yeah, and I know you were a shore patrol guy. Is that right?
It was an MP.
MP.
Yeah.
I've managed to stumble through 83 years without ever having voted for a Republican, and I do vote, but my politics moved to the left instead of to the right, as a lot of people do in the military.
Interesting.
When I was in Berkeley, a lot of people decided it'd be a good idea to bomb Berkeley, just as a sort of joke. But I was. It turns out there was a lieutenant colonel who commuted to the Air Force Base from Reno, which happened to be about 2 miles more than the commute from Berkeley. Took me 2 hours to get from Berkeley to the Air Force Base and crack it dawn in the morning and go for a flight. And we spent a lot of time on alert at the alert shack, ready to go hop on an airplane and start World War III if necessary and all that. It was part of the Strategic Air Command, and at that point, their motto was "Peace is our profession." Interesting thing, the idea being that if you are equipped and able to bomb the hell out of somebody else, then the likelihood of them, on short notice, the likelihood of them bombing you is substantially less.
Sure.
And I do believe in that argument. I think there's an upper limit to how many bombs and bombers you need to have, and missiles and this and that and the other. And
so you've served. How do you feel about the military at this point?
Deeply fearful that some asshole like Donald Trump would be the head of the military and start World War III. To tell you the honest truth, you can delete that if you like, but I think that most people have been such that they thought that there was sanity among the Joint Chiefs of Staff and of the people who sort of the president can declare war.
Yeah.
And, so that's a very difficult thing. And in Berkeley, I argued for the genius of having a force that would be able to keep others from bombing us. And at the Air Force Base, I argued that it's the free speech movement expressed the genius of democracy. And so, of course, I didn't have any friends either place. Actually, I had friends in both places because I got away with it. And so, yeah, I read some philosophy and played bridge with my colleagues on alert and all those things.
So you mentioned joining the military and being not quite disciplined enough to go to graduate school. So after leaving the military, were you disciplined then, and did you head to graduate school?
Well, actually, yeah. It helped to have a full scholarship and actually made money as a graduate student. Never have written a check to Syracuse University, and they've written a lot to me. Actually, I've written one, a parking ticket for, I think, $15. But
so you, sorry.
So, well, and I had GI Bill and all that.
Gotcha.
I do want to go back and tell a story or two about B-52 Hood because
sure, go for it.
The airplanes are very amazing machines. There's sort of two things that you do when you take off on a B-52. One is you go on airborne alert, in which case you do have armed missiles and bombs in the bomb bay, and do nothing that risks in any way possibility of bad things happening with those bombs. But the fact that two airplanes go up to the North Pole and out the Aleutian chain and bore holes in the sky and that sort of thing, and refuel twice, 120,000 pounds each time while you're airborne, and you land almost 24 hours after you took off. And the crew is exceedingly tired at the end of boring all those holes in the sky. And the other thing that you might do on a B-52 is train for dropping bombs and navigating and doing air refueling and doing navigation legs and with various different sites that are equipped to allow you to simulate the dropping of a bomb and precisely identifying how close you are to the target and that kind of thing, and electronic warfare officers, jam radars, and that kind of thing. And so you do a lot of training like that, like 3 to 4 training missions a month, and then once every 6 months you'd have a couple of airborne alerts in which you'd have to fly for 24 hours at a time. That's called Chrome Dome, and there are 3 different routes and tra-la. And I'm completely ignorant of how things are done these days. But as it works out, I had what I thought was my last training flight in 1968 in early April. And I'm sorry. Yeah, that's true. And so I landed from a training flight and thought that was my last one. But I found out that the Strategic Air Command had declared that Beale Air Force Base, the 744th Bomb Squadron, and everybody else associated with the Air Force Base had to have an operational readiness inspection, an ORI, which is a very, very, very big deal for the guy that's the commander. The guy that's the commander is a full bird colonel with lots of experience and lots of ribbons on his chest and all that. And if his outfit does well on an operational readiness inspection, he's got a very good chance of getting a star instead of a mere eagle, so becoming a brigadier general. If the operational readiness inspection does not come out extremely well, then he's a civilian literally in 2 days.
Wow.
So, I mean, he didn't have to cry himself to sleep because he gets paid fairly well for retirement. Sure. But that's a good deal of pressure. And in the Air Force, they say, and many other organizations, shit runs downhill.
Yeah. Gravity
being what it is, and the chain of command being what it is. So everybody is completely wired for, we got to do this. And so it happened that you've got 24 hours before the horn goes off again to prepare all of the airplanes to take off and fly the ORI mission. Nobody's ever been to this target before or done exactly what it is. So it turns out that in this case, there was some place in Texas that was set up for ORIs. Mm-hmm. And so we took off, and as I recall, well, no, there's another mission. We had a bad engine and had to replace it, and managed to just get off with a few moments to spare and all this. But we went through our ORI, and things went fairly well. And it turns out I was over Memphis, Tennessee, for the only time in my life flying for the Air Force. And it's a place where I'd gone to college and had lots of friends. And one of the people that was on the radio was a guy that I knew from my ham radio operator days, and a guy named Walt Mubern. And so I heard Walt, and I didn't even know that he was an air traffic controller, but I heard his voice. So in any event, we went through a navigation thing, and we were over Memphis about 10 o'clock local time, and then went down through a low-level bombing thing in Texas, which we thought went pretty well. And then we came up, and we're driving across Arizona and New Mexico back to Beale Air Force Base in Northern California, and we hit clear air turbulence. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's CAT, it's called. It's fairly rare, but extremely severe. And I'd, at that point, been airborne in B-52s for about 2,400 hours, and I'd never experienced such turbulence in my life. And so I could think, oh my God, this is my last flight. And I could just imagine the airplane flying apart and me having to bail out and floating at 45,000 feet.
Interesting.
In a parachute for half an hour. And
it's just an unnatural feeling.
Absolutely.
I mean, because I've been taught for so long that turbulence is something that rarely brings a plane down in general.
That's true.
And so, but being in it is just that overtook your ability to be rational, and you
Right.
thought that was it.
Right. Well, yeah, but I'm sitting in an ejection seat that I can go rotate and squeeze, and I'm out of the airplane.
Sure.
Literally, it's 2 seconds.
Interesting.
And but then, of course, you're hanging on a chute.
yeah.
With your emergency equipment below you and a life raft and all that stuff, and flying through the breeze above, whatever. So, in any event, sure enough, we managed to all get back. All of the 30 airplanes that were flying, and it had the same, damn, I was scared shitless and all that. So in any event, we landed 3 o'clock in the morning and go for debriefing, and everybody's nothing but smiles. And there's the wing commander. You guys did great work. And so we passed the ORI. The bird colonel, who's head of the hospital, pulls out his little bag, and there's medicine for everybody. It's Jack in the Black and something that looks like a cough syrup, right? Mm-hmm. So, but everybody knows. And so you grab a sandwich and all that, and about 15 minutes later, somebody said, "Oh, by the way, something happened while you guys were airborne you might not have heard about. Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis at about the time we were over town." And we didn't know it until then, and it just like a hush came over everybody. And I had to drive back to Berkeley and tell it to my wife, 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was my last flight in a B-52. So I wanted to share that with you. You asked, does flying around the air sometimes affect you? And the answer is, well, as you know what happened.
Interesting. So in one day, you went through that terrible turbulence, flew over Memphis, heard your pal from the ham radio days, and came back and heard that.
Dr. King had been killed.
Mm.
Yeah, that troubles the soul.
Sure.
And I won't forget that last flight.
That was a tough time I didn't live through, but I mean, the emotion I see is something I shared through everyone I know that lived through it. On another note, you never got to be stationed in France, but did you ever end up going and living in France?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've lived in France about 4 years of my life. Shortest visit was 4 days, and the longest was 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah. And,
what brought you there? Your wife?
Yeah, I was married to a woman whose field was French literature, and so I was in my second year of graduate school in philosophy, and she had a master's degree from University of Wisconsin, but she was working on her PhD to just her first year because we had a babe in arms at home. As a matter of fact, Sarah, that's my youngest now, Zoe, who's now 57 years old and teaches English as a second language in Kansas City, turned 1 year old in France. We actually went from Berkeley, and when we got out of the Air Force, to Syracuse, where I had a nice fellowship and was going to go to graduate school in September, and we had 3 months, and we spent most of that in France and England, and just loved it. And turns out there's a revolution of May of '68 that was on, and some exciting moments in how the French lived their lives and whatnot. But I learned some French, came back, and then 2 years later, my wife got an opportunity to go to France to teach English, of course, at the University of Poitiers. Poitiers used to be the second largest city in France. In about 1150. It's now about the fifth or sixth. But in any event, an interesting town, 337 kilometers southwest of Paris. And so she wondered if I could come along. And so I talked to the head of the philosophy department. He said, well, Larry, if you take your comprehensive exams and write me the first chapter of your dissertation, I'll let you go, and you can take your scholarship with you. So we went over, all that happened, fell in love with the place. I got a job teaching in the English department, in engineering department where I taught English, scientific English for one gig, and another to some people who were in a master's program, all of French people that were in a master's degree program having to do with some special kind of cement and techniques for using it in building buildings. And so I found out that it was possible to find country houses for pretty cheap, and one thing led to another. Ended up buying a house for $3,600 with 5 buildings on the property, and a little enclosed courtyard, and staying for 2 years instead of just one academic year.
Wow, I can attest for France being such a beautiful place, beautiful people, beautiful place. I spent some time in Paris, and it was wonderful. So so being immersed in that culture, how did that affect you, and did that change your worldview in any way?
I came close to becoming a French citizen when Nixon was bombing Cambodia, and I was just so ashamed of our country doing dumb shit like that. And I knew people that died that were flying B-52s, and it was. I did fall in love with France, and yet I realized that I am an American. I had a ton of fun and learned an awful lot of building science working on these buildings. Mm-hmm. I plumbed it and wired it and built a pottery in one of the outbuildings, and did a lot of retrofit work to make it energy efficient. And so that was my first try at that. And
so you went there with your wife, and I mean, so When it comes to traveling with your partner, I mean, how does that traveling with your partner? How does it enrich your personal growth and shared growth? I mean, your wife, Wincia.
Right.
By the way, his wife, his partner now, Wincia, who was here and helped me set up. She's gone now. She's an artist, but she was an attorney. Beautiful, beautiful person, wonderful person, and really, I kind of wanted to talk to them both together, but it would have been a much longer. I mean, they're just the most interesting people. I love them. So friends of mine. But yeah, as far as traveling and spending time with a partner and having experiences, how does that affect your personal and shared growth?
I got a fun story for you. I
Sure.
love you too, by the way.
Yeah.
But you're pretty easy to love. In any event, the woman, Lynn, that is the father of my firstborn, a girl named Zoe. We were in a pension de famille in Paris, a place where families can come and have a meal or two or even three, and sort of family style gig, and there are other families and kids and stuff like that. Well, Zoe had her first birthday and took her first step on the very same day, the 31st of May, and so you asked, did I learn anything? And the answer is yes. What I did was stupidly open a champagne bottle without being careful about it. And what it does is blow the cork halfway across the room, endangers whoever happens to be in the trajectory of the cork. And more importantly, waste champagne, for Christ's sake. So I learned how to do it properly.
Sure.
Right. You take it easy. You are very comfortable in having a towel, and just take off the cork ever so gently, and it goes like
Gotcha.
that. No banging around like stupid football players who, have won some big game and the floor's got champagne and whatever. So you don't waste the stuff. You share it with your friends in a civilized way.
So you're telling me, from your multiple years of being in France, learning French, spending time there and buying a house, the most important thing that comes to mind is you don't waste champagne and put a person's eye out with the cork.
It's on a long list. I also wrote a good deal of my dissertation at the Bibliothèque Nationale, which is their national library of whatever, and you've got to get a senior professor from some gee whiz university to write you.
Was your graduate degree in philosophy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in any event, this is just a really, really great way to do research. You can go and get books out of the stacks yourself. You can tell the people who are running around taking care of you exactly what you want, and they bring them to your place. And if you come back the next day, you can put a ceinture, a belt, around 5 books that you're working on, and they keep them for you. And if you're there before 9:30 in the morning, they have your little incandescent bulb with 30 watts sitting at your own table doing your own scholastic work. Sure. And you can Xerox what you want to, and it has written across it in French, this has been copied from the Bibliothèque Nationale and shall not be recopied, and all that silliness. But you get it. You're just treated like, a prince. Scholar, for Christ's sakes, right? And,
you should be.
And you can learn a lot and get a lot done in a nice period of time. And it's not very far from really nice places to have lunch. Sure. In downtown Paris.
Yeah.
No shortage.
Paris is beautiful. Yeah. So, all right, brother, listen.
Music.
I want you to take a second and clear your mind of everything we just talked about. Here's a really important question. What's the most strange, weird, or out of the ordinary ordinary thing you've ever seen or experienced or participated in that you can share?
Okay. This is a true story, and it came very, very, very close to
like when they started
ending
that way.
My life. Yeah, well. I think I mentioned that B-52s are very large airplanes, and once in a while you fly one on airborne alert, which means that you've got instruments of mass destruction on board to be carefully done. And all that. And so whenever you take off, you calculate two speeds. One is called an S1 speed and the other is S2. S1 is always 70 knots. When the airplane gets up to 70 knots, then the radar man, the pilot calls to the radar man coming up 70 knots, ready, now. And the radar guy says, got it. And that means he's started his stopwatch. And then the S2 speed is the speed at which you commit to taking off. If you aren't fast enough when you hit this pre-computed S1 speed, then you have to pull back all 8 engines and dump a parachute and ride the shit out of the brakes in order to keep from taking off.
Sure.
So this is a function of field pressure, altitude, temperature, and the weight of the airplane, and it's calculated from an algorithm of whatever. And so typically, which is heavy a load, is a very heavy takeoff, and it's summertime, which means it's a longer takeoff roll. And so coming up S1, ready now, and my pilot, Gene Carnahan, said, we've got a goer. And as soon as he said that, which means that we're now committed to fly, then there was a gigantous bang off of the right tail. I'm sorry, right wing. I ride backwards in the airplane, by the way, but off the right wing, and the number 8 engine went out, and the number 7 engine was looking funky, and the co-pilot's looking up and he sees fire warning lights on both engines, and he's just about to hit the fire warning light when the pilot breaks his arm and shoves all 8 throttles to as far as he possibly can, the pedal to the metal. And we got to the end of the runway, and he called for the wheels, and we got the wheels up and missed the base exchange about 5 feet.
Wow.
Which is at the end of the runway. And so needless to say, we did not fly to the North Pole that day. But the airplane was too heavy to risk landing it, and so we had to stay at a low level, drop flaps, drop wheels to burn gas as fast as we possibly can.
Interesting.
And 4 hours later, had an emergency landing. It took up, almost the whole 3 miles
Interesting.
of the runway, and we had to stay in the airplane because riding the brakes raises the pressure in the tire, and sometimes one of those gigantous tires that's got steel in it blows up, and you do not want to hop out of the airplane just as that blows up, because that'll be the end of you. So we're sitting in this airplane. Meanwhile, the base commander and everybody else went out to see what happened. There were a few feathers on the runway. It was the only thing. So apparently we hit a big bird, which went into the number 8, and the number 8 is also pumping water to the number 7, and you use water to take off 10,000 pounds of water to aid in extra thrust after you begin your takeoff roll. And so that was so a whole bunch of things went wrong, and we almost caused a calamity, and everybody on the airplane would have been dead. And there's 300,000 pounds of gasoline, or JP4, that would be on the base exchange.
Were you loaded with ordnance also?
Yes.
So apparently I can see from the emotion that it's pretty vivid memory.
Oh yeah, we'll never forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you buy your pilot an extra little glass of whatever it is?
For sure.
He turned out to be an Irishman who shared, my sense for the importance of alcohol once in a while.
Sure.
I mean, he didn't have a sort of a deep running problem, but he appreciated lifting a glass when it's appropriate, and it was appropriate that day.
So we're coming somewhat to a close, but I'm kind of forced to ask. I'm curious, when you come to so close to your life being at its end, how do you see life after that?
I actually did. My heart stopped. This is about 3 years ago, and I had open heart surgery, and 2.5 days later, my heart stopped beating 3 times in a row, 7 o'clock in the morning at Boulder Community Hospital. And so I, of course, I've reflected on that. Obviously, my heart guy said he had to sprint across the hospital twice to deal with all that, and wanted to make sure that I was dutifully. You bet I'm appreciative you saved my bacon, man. You kidding? So I've thought about it, so I guess in a way I was sort of dead, and the answer to the question is that being dead is absolutely nothing. That's the bit of experience that I've had. But I was also conscious when that Wensia was there. I mean, she was shooed out of the hospital room while everybody and their brother came and doing this, that, and the other to shock me back into existence and drama. But I was conscious of the fact that she was probably worried, which she was, and so I tried to think of a joke to tell her.
Sure.
And so I managed to do that, just to realize that, Larry's still kicking, and the fact that my brain didn't have any blood pumped to it for
Sure.
a while, nonetheless allowed me to, still love her and be conscious of the fact, and that runs deep, and that runs deeper than anything still in my life.
Yeah.
And so we're best buddies, but that was a time that tried my soul.
Sure.
But it was, in another sense, absolutely nothing, if you know what I mean. So
No, I'd like you to elaborate.
No pearly gates, no hell and whatever it is.
So what you're saying is, in your moments of not existing for that brief time, you didn't exist. There's nothing. There's no, from your point of view, there's nothing spiritually, mentally, physically tangible after your heart stops. You just don't exist.
As best I could tell from that experience.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that heaven and earth, or heaven and whatever hell, are on earth, and there are plenty of people in the Holy Land these days that are certainly experiencing hell, and they're still alive for a while. And
so life, and
I like life. I think it's a great idea.
I think
I'm in
so.
favor of it.
Yeah.
I'd live it with great gusto. I like to dance. I like to shoot the shit with friends. I like to invent things. I like to, hang out and
sure.
pet the dog and whatever. Sure, I'm full of life.
So,
but when it's over, it's over.
Yeah.
And so if I can contribute to, somebody's compost pile, it suits me fine. I mean,
life is fun, plenty to do, and therefore live it, because this is your opportunity.
Best I
we
can
don't
tell.
We don't know what's before or after. But,
that's right, we don't.
And with that said, what are any last words or thoughts you have for anyone out there listening who want to get out there and have some new experiences, novel experiences, travel, do new things? I mean, there's so many people out there who sort of live through the television nowadays, or don't do much.
Yeah.
What do you say? What do you say to them?
I think it's possible to watch a TV show and learn something from it.
Sure.
But don't let it define your life. I mean, I like to read and write and dance and sing and chat with wonderful human beings like you.
Sure, thank you.
And so that's life for me. And and there's a whole bunch of stuff about which we're ignorant. The brightest of the bright knows a tiny, tiny bit. And this gee whiz place called Earth is really a nice planet, and we should be a lot nicer to it than we are. Work hard at that because it's the only one that we've got. But compared with the universe itself, it's a tiny footnote that's passing in a microsecond. So the TV preachers who try to fleece the unexpected, and the poor folks that can't afford to write them a check, they nonetheless work up their courage and do it, and because they hope they'll be blessed somehow or another in some eternal life that's easier on them than the present one. I feel that the guilty party there is the TV preachers.
Yeah.
So, but what life we have, we need to make the best of it and have fun, you know, and enjoy chatting with friends.
And I think that's an important enough way to close this place. And you've lived a wonderful life, and I'm glad to be a part of it. You're a wonderful guy. I really appreciate you speaking to me and sharing your experiences with the world. There's so many people out there who, that I think would take interest in some of your experiences. So I'm grateful for you, brother, and I appreciate everything.
Well, I'm flattered and delighted, and I really love what you're doing.
That's well, great. I mean, this is new, so we'll see where it goes. But I appreciate you getting me started, man.
Well, we all wonder what we're going to do when we grow up.
I'm still wondering. I'm trying to figure it out.
Me too, pal.
But I'm going to make it happen. So,
sure, you forgot to mention that I sing in the shower.
Thanks for joining me on the Novel World Travels podcast. Subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Join me on my community on Facebook. That's / Novel World Travels, and Instagram, Novel World Travels. And join me on my webpage, which is novelworldtravels.earth. And remember, life is outside. And if you can't get there, join me and my friends on the Novel World Travels podcast. I love you all.
Life is